The BBQ party had just begun when the reign of the HOA tyrant came to an end. Why, you ask? Let me tell you. I had just flipped a rib on the grill when I heard tires screeching on gravel. Karen, the HOA president, stormed in like I had committed a serious crime. "Stop right now. This land is under community control. You're not allowed here," she shouted like she was about to summon a helicopter. But the pond, the land, it all belonged to me, and I had every legal document to prove it. Instead of listening to reason, she called the cops not one, but 2 squad cars. 9 minutes later, they arrived. It only took me 30 seconds to flip the script. The way I kicked the entire HOA off my property will blow your mind. But her obsession with my grill being a few steps over some imaginary line accidentally unraveled a massive scheme involving fake property lines, millions of dollars, and 17 neighborhoods. Comment Karen. If you're watching this, because right now I'm sitting in court, watching Karen Foster point at me and scream that the BBQ ruined her life as she weeps in front of the judge. 3 months, that's how long it had been since Dad passed, and I was still getting used to the silence around Sullivan Ranch. The 40-acre property felt enormous without his booming laugh echoing across the fields, or his terrible dad jokes floating over from the workshop. I'd inherited this slice of heaven in Willowbrook County, complete with a natural spring-fed pond that sparkled like diamonds under the Texas sun. Dad always said this land was our family's blood, sweat, and tears turned into something beautiful. Today, I just wanted to honor his memory with a simple barbecue by the water's edge, the way we used to do every Sunday after church when I was a kid. The smell of mesquite smoke and sizzling meat always brought back those precious moments when life was simpler, and Dad was still here to share his wisdom about everything, from fixing engines to fixing hearts. I had just finished seasoning perfect ribeye, my father's secret blend of garlic, pepper, and love, when I heard the unmistakable crunch of expensive tires on gravel. A black Mercedes sedan pulled up to my property line, and out stepped someone who looked like he'd rather be foreclosing on orphanages than dealing with weekend barbecues. Marcus Webb stood about 6'2", wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and carried himself with the kind of cold professionalism that made funeral directors seem warm and fuzzy. His hair was slicked back with enough product to style a small army, and his smile, if you could call it that, looked like it had been carved from ice and disappointment. Everything about him screamed corporate efficiency and zero tolerance for human emotion or weekend fun. "Mr. Sullivan," Marcus said, his voice carrying the warmth of a tax audit. "I'm Marcus Webb, representing the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to discuss your recent activities on this property." He gestured toward my grill setup like I was operating a meth lab instead of cooking dinner. His clipboard appeared from nowhere, thick with official-looking documents that rustled in the gentle breeze like autumn leaves of bureaucratic doom. According to our community guidelines, Section 4.7.2, outdoor cooking activities must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee at least 72 hours in advance. Additionally, any structures temporary or permanent placed within 50 feet of community waterways require environmental impact assessments and written consent from the board of directors. I looked at this guy like he just told me the moon was made of government cheese and aliens were running the local Dairy Queen. "Hold up there, partner," I said, wiping barbecue sauce off my hands with a dish towel that had seen better decades. "This here's my land, bought and paid for with a deed that goes back to my great-grandfather. That pond you're talking about, it's been in the Sullivan family since 1952, long before your HOA existed or even dreamed of existing." I walked over to my truck and pulled out a weathered folder from the glove compartment, the same folder Dad had shown me countless times growing up. Inside was the original property deed, yellowed with age but clear as crystal about the boundaries and ownership rights. See this here, I said. This document says I own everything from that oak tree over there to the creek running behind those hills. Your HOA has about as much authority over my barbecue as a goldfish has over NASA. Marcus examined the paperwork with the enthusiasm of someone reading insurance terms and conditions. His expression never changed from professional skepticism mixed with mild constipation. He took photos of the documents with his phone, probably uploading them to some corporate database where fun goes to die. Miss Sullivan, I appreciate you showing me these documents, and I'll certainly need to verify their authenticity with our legal department. However, I should point out that community standards and property rights often intersect in complex ways that require careful review by qualified professionals. He closed his clipboard with the finality of a coffin lid and straightened his tie, like he was preparing for battle. I strongly recommend you familiarize yourself with the current community guidelines and consider the impact your activities might have on property values and neighborhood harmony. We'll be in touch, he added, walking back to his Mercedes with mechanical precision, like a robot designed to crush dreams and weekend plans. Something in his tone bothered me more than the Texas heat in August. It wasn't just the corporate speak, or the thinly veiled threats wrapped in legalese. It was the way he said, "We'll be in touch," like he already knew something I didn't. Like this was just the opening move in a chess game where I didn't even know I was playing. Dad always taught me to trust my gut. And right now, my gut was telling me that Marcus Webb and his mysterious legal department were going to be bigger problems than a two-headed rattlesnake in a phone booth. The way he'd looked at my land like he was already planning its funeral made my skin crawl worse than finding a spider in my coffee. I went back to my grill, trying to recapture the peaceful moment I'd been enjoying before corporate Grim Reaper showed up to rain on my barbecue parade. But the mood was shot like trying to enjoy a sunset after someone tells you the world's ending tomorrow. The ribeye was still perfect, the pond still sparkled like nature's own jewelry box, and the memory of Dad's laughter still echoed in my heart. But now there was something else in the air besides mesquite smoke and summer warmth. The unmistakable smell of trouble brewing. The kind that starts small and grows into something that changes everything. As I watched Marcus' taillights disappear down the county road, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple property dispute. Marcus Webb stopped his car at the end of my driveway, rolled down his window, and turned back toward me with the kind of smile that made funeral directors look cheerful. "Mr. Sullivan," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance like a death knell. "I'd strongly advise you to read the HOA guidelines thoroughly. There are certain things you might not fully understand yet." The way he said it made it sound less like helpful advice and more like a threat wrapped in a three-piece suit and delivered with corporate precision. Something told me that Marcus Webb knew exactly what he was talking about, and whatever those certain things were, they were about to turn my peaceful barbecue plans into the opening shot of a war one never saw coming. 2 days later, I was back at the pond with another rabbi and a stubborn determination to enjoy my damn property. The morning sun painted the water gold, and for a blessed moment, I almost forgot about Marcus Webb and his corporate threats. That piece lasted exactly 14 minutes, which was apparently how long it took for Karen Foster to mobilize her army of badge-wearing enforcers. I heard her before I saw her, the unmistakable shriek of someone who'd made a career out of ruining other people's good times. "There he is. That's the man I told you about." Karen's voice cut through the morning air like a chainsaw through a symphony, and suddenly, my peaceful barbecue turned into the opening scene of a bad reality television show. Karen Foster looked exactly like what you'd get if you crossed a real estate agent with a particularly aggressive peacock. She stood about 5'6" in heels that could double as weapons, wearing a powder blue blazer that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager from 3 counties away." Her blonde hair was styled into what I can only describe as a helmet of hairspray and bad decisions, and she carried herself with the confident swagger of someone who'd never met a rule. She couldn't weaponize against her neighbors. Behind her marched two police officers who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else, including a tax audit or root canal convention. Officer Martinez walked with the weary resignation of someone who's dealt with Karen's dramatics before, while Officer Rodriguez kept glancing around like he was looking for the hidden cameras that would reveal this was all an elaborate prank. "Thank God you're here," Karen announced, clutching her designer purse like it contained the secrets of the universe. "This man has been repeatedly trespassing on community property despite multiple warnings from our management company. He set up some kind of illegal cooking operation right next to our protected wetlands, probably violating dozens of environmental regulations and disturbing the peace of our law-abiding residents." She gestured toward my modest grill setup like I was operating a nuclear waste facility instead of cooking lunch. "I've documented everything, taken photographs, and consulted with our legal team. This is a case of willful property destruction and community disruption that requires immediate law enforcement intervention." Officer Martinez stepped forward, his notepad already out, looking like he'd rather be directing traffic in a thunderstorm than dealing with another HOA dispute. "Sir, we've received a complaint about unauthorized activities on community property. Can you show us some identification and explain what you're doing here?" His tone suggested he'd already made up his mind about who was the troublemaker in this situation, probably based on Karen's dramatic presentation and her obvious familiarity with local law enforcement procedures. I noticed he didn't ask to see my property deed first, didn't question Karen's version of events, and didn't seem particularly interested in hearing my side of the story before jumping to conclusions about property rights and community regulations. "Happy to help, officer," I said, pulling out both my driver's license and the same weathered property deed I'd shown Marcus Webb. "I'm Maverick Sullivan, and this is my land. It has been since my great-grandfather bought it in 1952, long before any HOA existed around here." Officer Rodriguez looked at the deed carefully, his eyebrows raising as he read the legal description and surveyed the boundaries. "According to this document, Mr. Sullivan owns everything from that oak tree to the creek, including the pond and about 40 acres surrounding it." His partner Martinez barely glanced at the paperwork, already convinced that Karen's dramatic performance was more credible than century-old legal documents and basic property rights. That's when something beautiful happened, the kind of moment that makes you believe in cosmic justice and the power of simple geography. Officer Rodriguez pulled out a GPS device and started walking around, checking coordinates against the deed description. Karen fidgeted with increasing nervousness. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd just solved a particularly annoying puzzle. "According to these property lines, you're currently standing about 15 feet inside Mr. Sullivan's private property. The community land starts over there, past that fence line." He pointed toward a stretch of grass that was clearly on the other side of a well-maintained boundary fence that Karen had ignored in her rush to cause trouble. Karen's face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a washing machine, cycling from confident pink to confused white to embarrassed red in about 10 seconds. "That's impossible," she sputtered, her carefully constructed authority crumbling like a sand castle in a hurricane. "Our surveyor marked the boundaries, and community property extends to the dew's edge. This man is using fake documents to confuse the situation and avoid accountability for his illegal activities." But Officer Rodriguez was already taking photos of the fence line, the deed, and Karen's current position on clearly private property, building a case that would make even the most creative lawyer weep with frustration. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back onto public property," Officer Rodriguez said with the patient tone of someone explaining basic physics to a particularly stubborn flat earther. "And Mr. Sullivan, You're well within your rights to continue your barbecue on your land." Martinez looked like someone had just told him that his favorite sports team had been traded to a different planet. His confident support of Karen evaporated faster than water on hot pavement. The whole dynamic shifted in that moment from Karen as the righteous victim to Karen as the trespassing troublemaker who'd wasted everyone's time with false accusations and dramatic performances. As the officers prepared to leave, Mrs. Thompson, from the neighboring property, shuffled over with the careful steps of someone who'd seen enough neighborhood drama to write a best-selling novel. She was probably 80 if she was a day, with silver hair and the kind of knowing smile that comes from decades of watching people make fools of themselves. "Honey," she whispered to me loud enough for everyone to hear, "Karen's got connections. At the police station, if you know what I mean. Her cousin works dispatch, and her bridge partner's married to a sergeant. Don't expect this to be the last time she calls in favors." The look she gave Karen could have frozen hell over, and Karen's face suggested she knew exactly what Mrs. Thompson was talking about. When the police cars finally pulled away, Karen was left standing on the correct side of the property line. Her confidence shattered and her authority questioned in front of witnesses, who'd probably be gossiping about this for months. But instead of slinking away in embarrassment like a normal person might, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my grill, my truck, and even the pond itself like she was building some kind of evidence file for future battles. Smile on her face wasn't the defeated grimace of someone who'd been proven wrong. It was the calculating smirk of someone already planning their next move in a game I was just beginning to understand. Something told me that Karen Foster wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and whatever she was plotting with that phone would make Marcus Webb's corporate threats look like a friendly neighborhood barbecue invitation. That night I couldn't sleep. The encounter with Karen and her pet police officers kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. Officer Martinez had looked at me like I was some kind of criminal for grilling on my property, and Karen's smug smile suggested this was far from over. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I gave up on sleep and walked down to the pond, where Dad and I used to sit whenever life got complicated. The moonlight turned the water into liquid silver, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice telling me that every problem was just a puzzle waiting for the right solution. Sitting on the weathered dock that Dad had built with his own hands, I felt smaller than I had since his funeral. The weight of fighting this battle alone pressed down on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I started wondering if maybe I should just pack up and move somewhere else, somewhere without HOAs and corporate vultures circling overhead. Dad had always been the fighter in our family, the one who stood up to bullies and bureaucrats with equal determination. Without him, I felt like David facing Goliath, except David had run out of stones, and Goliath had brought a legal team to the party. The next morning, desperate for answers, I decided to go through Dad's papers more thoroughly than I had after the funeral. His home office was organized with military precision, every folder labeled according to a system that made perfect sense once you understood how his mind worked. I started with the property files, hoping to find something that might help me understand why Marcus Webb and Karen Foster seemed so confident about their claims on my land. That's when I found Dad's journal, a leather-bound notebook tucked behind his surveying equipment, like he'd been hiding it from someone. The entries went back 2 years, and as I read his careful handwriting, my blood started running cold. 15th of March. They're back again, same black sedan, same guy with the clipboard taking pictures of the pond. Margaret Thompson says they've been asking neighbors about property values and development potential. Something's not right about this whole situation. The entries continued month after month, documenting mysterious visitors, strange questions from neighbors, and Dad's growing suspicion that someone was planning something big for our little corner of paradise. The journal entry that got my attention was dated just 6 months before Dad's death. Today, I caught them surveying near the creek without permission. When I confronted the man, he claimed to be working for the county, but his equipment wasn't county issued. He mentioned something about updating community boundaries and ensuring proper land use compliance. Karen Foster is involved somehow. She keeps asking pointed questions about my property whenever we run into each other. I need to document everything because I have a feeling this is just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple property dispute. My hands were shaking as I read Dad's final entries, written just weeks before the heart attack that took him away. They're getting bold now, actually walking onto my property with surveying equipment and official-looking documents. The Foster woman brought some corporate type with her yesterday, a guy in an expensive suit who looked at my land like he was already planning its funeral. They didn't see me watching from the workshop, but I heard enough to know they're planning something that involves acquisition and development potential. Whatever they're up to, it's bigger than just my 40 acres. If something happens to me, I want Maverick to know what he's up against. Reading those words felt like getting punched in the stomach by a ghost. Dad had known something was coming, had been trying to protect me and our land from forces I was just beginning to understand. I spent the next hour searching through his filing system with a new purpose, looking for the evidence he'd mentioned collecting. Hidden in a folder marked Equipment Maintenance, I found dozens of photographs showing strangers on our property with surveying equipment set up without permission. And even shots of Karen Foster deep in conversation with men in business suits. That's when Duke Morrison knocked on my front door, his weathered face creased with concern and something that looked like guilt. Duke had been Dad's closest friend. For over 20 years, a retired insurance investigator who'd moved to the countryside to enjoy his golden years in peace. "Son, I've been meaning to talk to you ever since that business with the police," he said, settling into Dad's favorite chair. "Your father and I knew something was brewing with that HOA crowd, but we didn't realize how deep it went until it was almost too late. There are things about this fight that your dad didn't get a chance to tell you." Duke's revelation hit me like a freight train. "Your father wasn't just documenting trespassers for his protection, Maverick," he said. "He was building a case collecting evidence of what we suspected was a coordinated effort to pressure landowners into selling their property for below market prices. We'd seen it happen in other counties' corporate developers using HOA regulations and legal pressure to force people out of homes their families had owned for generations. The problem is," Duke continued, "your dad died before he could finish gathering all the evidence we needed to prove what they were really up to." As Duke talked, painting a picture of corporate conspiracy that would make a paranoid novelist proud, I felt something shift inside me. The grief and confusion that had been weighing me down since Dad's funeral were transforming into something much more powerful. This wasn't just about my right to grill hamburgers on my property anymore. This was about protecting everything. Dad had worked for everything our family had built over 3 generations, and making sure that whatever corporate vultures were circling overhead wouldn't pick the bones clean without a fight. Duke stood to leave, his expression as serious as a heart attack. "Son, there are things about this battle that even your father didn't know, secrets that Karen Foster and her corporate friends have been keeping locked up tighter than Fort Knox. If you're serious about fighting this thing, you're going to need allies, evidence, and probably a good lawyer. But most importantly, you're going to need to check your father's safe. He left you more than just property deeds and surveying equipment. He left you the tools to win this war, if you're brave enough to use them." While I was still processing Duke's revelation about Dad's secret investigation, Karen Foster was busy launching her counterattack with the precision of a military operation and the subtlety of a stampeding rhinoceros. Her Facebook post went viral within hours, complete with carefully cropped photos that made my modest barbecue setup look like an industrial waste disposal operation, threatening the very fabric of civilized society. "Concerned citizens of Willowbrook," her post began. "We have a serious problem with an uncooperative resident who refuses to follow community guidelines and is threatening the safety and property values of our beautiful neighborhood. The post continued with a masterclass in manipulation and selective truth-telling that would have impressed professional politicians and con artists worldwide. Karen claimed I had been aggressively confrontational with law enforcement, refused to comply with reasonable community standards, and was creating environmental hazards near protected wetlands. She even managed to make my perfectly legal barbecue sound like I was operating a chemical weapons facility in my backyard. The comment section exploded with neighbors taking sides, some defending Karen's version of events while others questioned why the HOA was suddenly so interested in a property that had been peacefully occupied by the Sullivan family for over 70 years. The hashtag Willowbrook Safety started trending locally, with Karen supporters sharing dramatic stories about property values plummeting and community standards collapsing because one man dared to grill hamburgers on his land. Mrs. Patterson, from 3 streets over, claimed she couldn't sleep at night knowing there was an unregulated cooking operation so close to her prize-winning rose garden. Bob Henderson, who'd never spoken to me in 15 years of being neighbors, suddenly became an expert on environmental law and water conservation, posting lengthy dissertations about the dangers of barbecue smoke near natural water sources. But was the arrival of Marcus Webb at my front door the next morning that showed me how deep this conspiracy went. This time he wasn't alone. He brought a woman in expensive business suit who introduced herself as Jessica Martinez from Pinnacle Properties Development Corporation. The way she looked at my land made my skin crawl like a vulture circling a wounded animal, calculating the best angle of attack for maximum efficiency and minimum resistance. "Mr. Sullivan," Jessica said with the warm smile of a loan shark offering to help with your gambling debts, "we understand you're having some challenges with community integration, and we'd like to offer you a solution that benefits everyone involved." Their solution was a buyout offer that made my head spin, not because it was generous, but because it was insultingly low. They wanted to purchase my 40 acres of prime Texas real estate, including water rights and mineral access, for about 1/3 of what similar properties had sold for in the past year. "This is a limited time offer," Marcus explained with the urgency of a used car salesman trying to move inventory before the lot gets repossessed. "Given the current community tensions and potential legal complications, we think it's in everyone's best interest to resolve this situation quickly and amicably." When I politely declined their generous offer to steal my family's legacy for pocket change, Jessica's friendly demeanor evaporated faster than morning dew in the Texas sun. "Mr. Sullivan, I think you misunderstand the gravity of your situation," she said, pulling out a thick folder of official-looking documents that rustled ominously in the morning breeze. "Pinnacle Properties has been contracted by the Willowbrook HOA to assess potential code violations and environmental impact issues in this area. We have preliminary findings that suggest significant compliance problems with your current land use practices." The documents she showed me looked impressive enough to fool someone who didn't know better, complete with official seals and legal terminology that would make a law professor reach for his dictionary. But something about the whole presentation felt wrong, like watching a magic show where you can see the wires holding up the floating lady. Marcus kept checking his phone and glancing toward the road, like he was expecting backup to arrive, while Jessica's confident demeanor seemed forced, like an actor playing a role she didn't quite understand. That's when my phone buzzed with a Facebook message from someone named Sophia Chun, whose profile picture showed a young Asian woman in a professional business suit standing in front of what looked like a courthouse. "Mr. Sullivan," the message read, "I saw the posts about your situation, and I think you might need legal assistance. I'm an attorney specializing in HOA abuse cases, and what I'm seeing here follows a pattern I've encountered in other counties. Would you be willing to discuss your situation? I think there's more going on here than simple property line disputes." Sophia's message felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, especially with Marcus and Jessica still standing on my porch, making thinly veiled threats about legal consequences and community harmony. I excused myself to take her call, and her voice carried the confidence of someone who had fought these battles before and won. "Mr. Sullivan, based on what I'm seeing online and some research I've done into Pinnacle Properties, I believe you're dealing with a coordinated effort to acquire your land through legal harassment and community pressure. This isn't uncommon, but it is illegal, and if we can prove what I suspect, we can stop them cold." During our conversation, Sophia explained that she had been tracking Pinnacle Properties across 3 counties, documenting their pattern of using HOA regulations and manufactured community disputes to pressure landowners into selling below market value. They target properties with unique features like water access, mineral rights, or development potential. Then they use HOA connections and political pressure to make life miserable for the owners until they give up and sell. "What makes your case interesting," Sophia continued, "is the pattern I'm seeing in the social media attacks and the timing of their buyout offer." When I returned to the porch, Marcus and Jessica were having a heated whispered conversation that stopped abruptly when they saw me. "Mr. Sullivan," Jessica said, her smile returning but not quite reaching her eyes, "we hope you'll consider our offer carefully. Sometimes fighting City Hall, or, in this case, the HOA, can be more expensive and time-consuming than people anticipate. We'd hate to see you get buried in legal fees and community conflicts over something that could be resolved so simply." When their black sedan pulled out of my driveway, I noticed they didn't head back toward town, but instead drove slowly past several other properties in the area, like they were conducting some kind of neighborhood reconnaissance mission. The whole encounter left me feeling like I'd just been visited by corporate gangsters who traded Tommy guns for briefcases, but kept the same basic business model of intimidation and threats wrapped in legal-sounding language. Sophia's final words before we hung up sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. "Mr. Sullivan, I need to warn you that once we start fighting back, they're going to escalate their tactics. People who plan this carefully and invest this much time and money don't just walk away when their first attempt fails. Tomorrow we start building a case that will expose their entire operation. But tonight, you should probably expect them to make one last desperate attempt to intimidate you into backing down." The next morning, I decided it was time to take the fight public in a way that would make Karen Foster and Pinnacle Properties regret ever hearing the name Sullivan. Sophia had suggested we livestream our evidence reveal from the exact spot where this whole mess started, right next to my pond, where Karen had first tried to intimidate me with her corporate puppet show. "Nothing says property rights like broadcasting the truth from your own land," Sophia said, helping me set up the camera equipment that would either make us local heroes or turn us into social media laughingstocks. By 10 in the morning, we had everything ready for what I was calling the Sullivan Ranch Truth Session, complete with a professional camera borrowed from Sophia's law firm and a microphone setup that would make podcasters jealous. Duke Morrison had arrived early to provide moral support and additional witness testimony, while Mrs. Rodriguez stood ready with her phone recordings and a notebook full of Karen's overheard conversations. The plan was simple: present our evidence methodically, let the facts speak for themselves, and give the people of Willowbrook County a chance to see what Pinnacle Properties had been doing to their neighbors for the past 3 years. The live stream started beautifully, with over 8,000 viewers joining within the first 10 minutes as word spread through Facebook groups and neighborhood networks faster than gossip at a church social. I introduced myself, explained the barbecue incident that started everything, and began presenting Sophia's evidence about the 17 neighborhood conspiracy that had been operating under everyone's noses. The comment section exploded with support from viewers who recognized their neighborhoods on our map and began sharing their own stories of HOA harassment and property pressure tactics.